Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Board Gaming Doctor. My name is Phil, and I'll be your Board Game Doctor today. In this Rosenblog episode, I go over the new information on the Nusfjord Big Box and its expansions and mechanisms, and go over Caverna, Cave vs. Cave, and a review specifically of the Big Box, which includes the original game plus the expansions. So first, with the Nusfjord Big Box, this was announced last year, and we knew that it was going to include the 2 latest expansions plus 2 new ones, but we didn't know when it would be released. We finally have some information from Lookout saying that the game will release this year around the summertime. It is projected to be available in Germany around May, and then a couple of weeks to months later, it will be available elsewhere. So the components that are listed in the rulebook, which is available to download and view on the Lookout website, include the information of what is included in this game. And that was of particular interest to me because, as perhaps for most of you who enjoy the Rosenblog and own the original Nusfjord box, I was wondering when they mentioned extra components what they meant by that, if there would be anything unique included in the big box that I did not own already. And that will be kind of the case. The big box will include all the components that are found in the base game, plus 50 additional wooden versions of the coins instead of the metal ones, which is a bummer to some who would have liked that, but it is what it is. There are also a grand total of 25 Elder cards, and this includes the ones that come in the base game and the expansions, and the 4 promo cards that were released in the years after Nusfjord was published. It also includes the ones that are in the new expansions as well. So if you are a completionist and want to gain all of the promo cards that you may have missed in the past, then perhaps the big box version is for you. Now, the last additional thing that this new big box version has, and with the expansions and everything, comes a newly designed expansion by Tony Boydell called the Besokende deck, and pardon my pronunciation of that. Translates to visitor or visiting in English, and it includes buildings that include a new mechanism called guests. And there are 32 guest tokens included in the game. So these guest tokens are virtually wild cards or wild tokens, and you acquire them through building certain building cards in this expansion deck. And when you acquire them, you place them into your personal supply and can use them in one of 3 major ways. You can discard them and put them back in the general supply to decrease the cost of future building cards. You can count them as 1 plate when you serve fish to the elders. So if you're missing fish, you can use them to supplant that, but you can also use them and permanently put them onto your boats that you include in your fishing row to increase the amount of fish that you gain in the income phase. So there are a variety of ways that you can utilize these guests. It doesn't seem too complicated to use them. There's only 1 page of rules that you have to keep track of. And I think that adds a little bit more variety and efficiency opportunities to the game, which I am excited to see and check out. And with that, there are no other major points of news that I would like to go over at this time. So let's get into a discussion about Cave vs. Cave. So Caverna Cave vs. Cave, specifically the Big Box edition, didn't actually come out very long ago. It came out and was published in 2022, with the original game coming out in 2017, with 2 expansions, Era 1 and Era 2, following that. As a quick overview, as you would imagine after playing Caverna the Cave Farmers, the original game, you are taking worker placement-esque type actions to build out your cave. And there are a few mechanisms here that do make this particular game stand out in comparison to the original Caverna, with some mechanisms that are shared which replicate the experience in a 2-player version game of Caverna. So what makes cave versus cave good or unique? So the way that you select actions in this game feels unique to me. While the randomness of the actions that are available each round remain the same as far as how they are revealed, which is very similar to Caverna and Agricola, where in round 1 you have the base actions available to you to take, plus 1 that is flipped over at random from the set that comprises, say, phase 2, and then you have more actions that are available in phase 3, and so on, thus leading you into the game and teaching you along the way which mechanism or which actions you are allowed to take. In the original games, you represent this with worker placement, and as you place a worker onto a spot, you block it completely from your opponents. In this game, since there are only 2 opponents, or I should say when you do play this game as a 2-player game, because it is available as a solo game as well, but when you play it against another opponent, you slide the action tile onto your side, representing that you have taken that action and your opponent cannot. And so I like that they kept this mechanism here, because that is a major way that this game functions, right? This is gateway to everything that you can accomplish in this game and in the original games as well, which make it very easy to understand. You place a worker on a spot, you take that action. It's fantastic. And so I'm glad that they kept it in that regard and didn't convolute it in a way that perhaps some other games have done in the past. But another mechanism that is very unique to this game, I think, is the excavation mechanism or action. So when you select the certain action tiles that allow you to excavate, what you do is you're tunneling into your personal tableau. At the beginning of the game, you either randomly seed or you draft out the building tiles that you will eventually build throughout the game. But instead of them, like in the original Caverna, being available at the beginning of the game, all of them face up to the side of the board for you to peruse and to plan to build on. In Cave versus Cave, they are flipped face down and distributed along your tableau in the rooms that you will eventually build them on. But when you do excavate them, you flip them over, you place them into a shared pool of buildings to build from that either you or your opponent can build from, and then you must take another action with the required resources, of course, to place it back onto your tableau. Now, you can build any building. It doesn't have to have come from your tableau to be built again onto it. You can choose buildings that your opponent flips over as well. And there are a handful that are available at the start of the game that aren't on your building anyway, but I like the way that this makes the game feel different every time. And one of the crutches that I and many other people have had with Caverna is that the feeling of the lack of variation from game to game is there perhaps because all of the building tiles are set and displayed at the beginning of the game for you. There's nothing that is switched from game to game. There's nothing random at the game setup about these. They're just there for you to plan on. Thus, the only randomness coming. The game itself includes when the harvests occur, what types of harvests occur, and in which order the action tiles or cards flip up. So in Caverna Cave versus Cave, the fact that you can randomize these buildings amongst you and your opponent, and thus you are exploring through your cave, flipping them over, and having these buildings come out in different orders, basically, make it feel different every time and force you to alter your strategy in different ways every time you approach the game. And the final mechanism that I do want to touch on is the drafting mechanism that is written in the rulebook, that you can draft these tiles according to where you would like to place them in your tableau, face down, of course. But knowing that if you have a memory of where they might be, you can perhaps tunnel through and excavate those buildings first, making them available, and then plan on building them as soon as you can. So I like the fact that you have that drafting ability in this game, which is obviously reminiscent of the drafting that can occur in Agricola. And the game before the game is something that appeals to me. And the fact that it is available and you can do it in this game makes it feel better as well. So when comparing this game, obviously you compare it to the original Caverna cave, the Cave Farmers, and you cut down on a lot of the mechanisms and opportunities that you have in the Cave Farmers to make this game quicker, more streamlined for a two-player experience. So you must cut out on things like building out your farm outside of the cave, farming type actions such as sowing and reaping and raising animals and things like that. Oh, and venturing as well. You don't have the opportunity to place weapons onto workers, which allow them to take extra resources along with the action like you do in the original Caverna, which also makes that game feel unique. In Cave vs. Cave, specifically with Era 2, and just as an overview of Era 1 and Era 2 to interject, Era 1 added some additional buildings that you can build from, and Era 2 added an additional board, a tableau that you can build onto after you have built out through Era 1. And it includes more building tiles too, but it also includes more resources, including the weapons and donkey resources. But unlike the original Caverna, where the weapons are used to adventure with and have their own little mechanisms that they follow, and the donkeys, can reproduce and everything, they are mostly used for just resource tracking in this game and just resource conversion to build additional buildings throughout the game and can serve as victory points later on in the game as well. And so there aren't a lot of side mechanisms that these resources use or utilize in Era 2 specifically, but it's nice that they are included and can be reminiscent of what they represent in the original Caverna. But for the most part, when comparing the original Caverna to Cave vs. Cave, I would say that Cave vs. Cave is more of a mechanically similar game rather than thematically, since you do pair out a lot of the mechanisms and abilities that you find in the original Caverna, which allow you to farm and make it reminiscent of Agricola. And so, yeah, Cave vs. Cave is mostly a resource tracking, resource conversion, and tableau building with tiles type of game that has the look and some of the feel of the original Caverna, and that's basically it. Other Rosenblog games, when comparing this game to those, like I think of Le Havre, especially with the fact that you have those special buildings and the original starting buildings, where at the face of it, at the start of the game, it feels like you don't have a lot of variation because you're using the same starting buildings as well as just a handful of special buildings. And so what makes the game replayable is the order in which these starting buildings come out, which drastically alter the way that you think about feeding your tableau, I guess, or your workers, whatever, and how you approach gaining your points throughout the game. In Cave vs. Cave, the way that you excavate, especially if you play randomly with the random seeding of these buildings, the way that these buildings come out after you excavate, the order in which they come out can, I feel, drastically alter the way that you approach the game. And perhaps not to the same extent as Le Havre, since there is a lot more complexity to that game just by the nature of its design, as Cave vs. Cave is a two-player, quicker version of an original game. So I don't dock it any points for, its intended purpose as a two-player version of a certain game. But I do feel like the feeling of having a different strategy be available every time you play this game can be found because of the way that that excavation mechanism works in this game. I do think of Or at Labora as well, mostly because of the resource conversion and the way that you place some of your buildings onto your tableau. One mechanism that I didn't touch on, but we'll briefly touch on now is the way that you build walls into your tableau. You can take an action which allows you to take a wall, place it into your tableau, thus fulfilling one of the requirements that all of your buildings have, which include not only the resources that you need to pay for the building, but also the spatial requirements necessary. Some buildings require a few walls to be put around the space that you build it in. Some don't, and some of them require them to be adjacent to the walls to be adjacent to each other, and some don't, etc. Easier visualized than explained through audio, but so that is pretty unique to this game, and it's interesting to think about how that fact, actually it just occurred to me that the wall mechanism of cave versus cave is reutilized in games like Oranienburger Canal, with the different types of routes being placed on and around your building tiles allows them to activate in certain ways. But in cave versus cave, they're building requirements. And so Orat Labora kind of has that similar vibe going as well, where it's more of a fact of the way that you place your buildings in relation to each other on your tableau results in points scored during the game and at the end of the game. And so I like that fact as well that is represented in cave versus cave, and happy to see that type of spatial puzzle reutilized in a 2-player version of the game. And then finally, of course, you would want to compare this versus 2v2 or 1v1 type of game to the other 1v1 games in Uwe Rosenberg's line of games, such as Patchwork, such as All Creatures Great and Small. And that will be an episode in and of itself, and I can't wait to do that. So I'll leave it for a future episode. But let's move on to the peer reviews and listen to what you had to say about Cave vs. Cave through comments on Board Game Geek. Now, folks who rated it highly said this in sum. There is surprise at the enjoyment and depth of the game Caverna Cave vs. Cave. Despite a relatively light and fun nature, the game has a worker placement feel and can be played quickly with a playtime of around 45 minutes. They highlight the strategic depth, meaningful decision-making, and the importance of Era 2 in shaping the game's experience. The setup for Era 2 is quick, and the game offers various strategies for victory, focusing on synergies, combos, and efficiency. And I agree that this game, in the way that from a sky-high, big-picture type of view, yes, it is purely resource management and conversion, gaining resources through actions and then using other actions to spend those resources on building buildings, and nothing more and nothing less. But the way that these buildings interact with each other, the way that they give you points, or the way that they allow you to convert resources at any time, creates for an experience that is really interesting and allows you to find new combos every time you play. And so, yeah, I do agree that this game has strategic depth to it, and it's more than just a lighter version of an original game. However, those who rated it lowly said this: it is described as a watered-down version of Caverna. While still fun and engaging, the game lacks real pressure. They criticized the design of the big box, considering it too large for its content. Era 2 as an expansion is controversial, with some players deeming it too long and scripted, while others enjoy the additional experience. So, in complete transparency, I have personally not played through Era 2 yet. When I played this in person with someone else, I got to Era 1, but it was already past, my bedtime, and I think we were checking out and could not make correct decisions very well that night, and so we had to call it quits after Era 1. But Era 2, and I should mention too that the way that this game represents worker placement and the acquiring of additional workers, as you see in Caverna, is not represented through an action like, grow your family or anything, but in the first phase of the game, you have 2 workers or 2 action tiles that you can select from. Then phase 2, you can select 3 actions, and then the final phase is 4. In Era 2, after you've past the Era 1 Phase 4 or Phase 3, whatever, you continue to take 4 actions per round. And so that equates to, I think, you have an additional 3 rounds after Era 1 ends. And so you have an additional 12 actions that you can take, which is more or less the amount of time that you have spent ramping up through Era 1. And so this game can sometimes feel like the playtime is doubled almost with Era 2, is what I gather from the comments of folks like you. And so I can see why Era 2 can feel a little bit long. I think personally playing Era 1 felt like the perfect amount of time to spend with a 1 versus 1 game, and which did last about an hour with the teach. And so playtime was about 45 minutes anyway. So to have another additional 30 to 45 minutes added onto with Era 2, I think would make the game feel a little long, but really depends on what the buildings are like. And for some people, it felt too scripted. Like Era 1, the discovery of all these buildings and in the order in which they come out was really enjoyable. But the buildings that are offered in Era 2 didn't have that same feeling of surprise, despite the additional use of different resources like the ore, the donkeys, and the weapons. And so some people had some issues with that. I would love to explore that perhaps on a solo adventure, and failed to mention that this game is enjoyable solo. I have played this game solo, and I like the way that it approaches that type of experience. And as far as the components are concerned, and the box size itself, I think it's fine. Like the big box holds all of the components comfortably, and it's fine. But so I do own the game itself, and I think it's okay. So in conclusion, I think this game is a really good adaptation of the original Caverna game, because it kind of keeps the core essence of Caverna there with the variations of the building tiles that you have, especially with combining all of Era 1 and Era 2, as well as keeping the resource conversion feeling the same, the spatial puzzling as well, which is there in Caverna, at the cost of a few mechanisms which make Caverna feel unique, like adventuring and just general farming in nature. You do have, the most important bits of Caverna still in Cave versus Cave, but there is still some personality to this game that make it feel unique and make it fun to play. The fact that you can play this solo as well as 2 players makes this game feel more approachable and accessible, depending on the situation. If you have someone else to play it with, that's great. If not, you can try it and try to solve an efficiency puzzle on your own. And as a whole, with the expansions, I think creates a complete game that is enjoyable and serves as a great resource conversion puzzle for you to solve. So those are my thoughts on Caverna Cave versus Cave. I really like it and can't wait to talk about it in comparison to the other Versus games by Rosenblog. And so that is all that I have for this month's Rosenblog. Thank you for listening or watching, and hope to catch you on the next Rosenblog or other episodes that talk about non-Rosenblog games, though they're great too. But thank you for joining me again, and hope to catch you in the next one as you schedule an appointment with us real soon. Take care.